Are you still
No,
going? Okay. Hello, everyone. We're going to get started a little early because we have a couple things that we want to share with you. Carol Davidson is here to share us about a little bit more about the flag with our like-minded people here in Food Storage Depot. So,
Yes, thank you. Since we're American citizens and also Utah citizens, we like to have a choice. We like to choose whether we get to keep our old flag, our historic flag, or if we want a new one. Because so far, a committee, some of the members weren't even members of, Utah, has decided that we need a new flag. And many people in Utah are not happy with this because they want a choice. They want to decide. They want to be the one to decide, not a committee to decide if we get a new flag. And so we want to pass around a referendum, and we have 30 days to get enough signatures so that this can be put on the November ballot and we can vote and choose whether we want to keep the flag that we love or have the new flag. Yes, I know. So, and also, where you print your name, it's got to be the way it is recorded on the voter identification card. And so if you go to this website, it will tell you. So make sure that your name is that way so they won't throw it out. So it counts. So I'll pass this around, and we appreciate you signing it if you would.
Okay. Do a test. Test.
Ago from my gardening class, don't forget to water them and give them intensive light. Okay. So some of your seeds are coming up. If they didn't come up by now, it's because they didn't stay moist. So bottom water them, put them in a little bit of water in the sink, and they'll suck it up. Make sure they stay moist and give them light about 6 inches above the seedlings at all times so that they don't stretch.
And that was a technical term, right?
Yes.
Okay, good. Awesome. So we're about ready to go.
We
Go ahead.
are.
Yeah.
So it's someone's birthday coming up. Marcelo. I know, I tricked you. So while we're here, everyone can sing him happy birthday.
I thought it was Carlos' birthday.
I know, not till September.
Oh, you fingers.
But we'll do.
Week, but I'm traveling.
Yeah, he'll be gone and he'll be out of town. So I figured while we're we're just gonna do this all together while you're here. Okay. We're gonna do a group picture really quick.
I did not expect that. That is pretty good.
Okay.
Show my wife. You are secret.
All right, everyone, let's sing him a happy birthday. You ready? Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you.
Happy birthday,
dear Marcelo.
Happy birthday to you.
Happy birthday.
I was not expecting.
Squeeze in and I'll get a picture of it.
Thank you. You guys, I did not expect that.
All right, everyone. Or Mark, squeeze in with someone that had a happy birthday sign. All right. 1, 2, 3.
I did not expect that. Wow. You guys got it. Usually I pick up on things like that. I vaguely remember you guys saying Carlos' birthday. Anyways, what did I say? Oh, I'm out of dad jokes. Wow. So how many of you guys were here for the 5-day challenge when we had David come up? Okay, do you guys remember that? Wasn't that pretty amazing? Okay, so David's an old. I'm old.
I don't know. We've known each other for like
We've known
15 years or
yeah,
something.
a long
ridiculous.
time. We've known each other for a long time, and he's passionate. Go take this hand mic just a little bit down, if you don't mind. That way, perfect. Okay. So anyway, he is passionate about preparedness, and the funny thing is, he'll call me and say, "I got this cool idea," and we'll go back and forth and everything else. But he's really good at a couple things, and he's good at a lot of things, but he's really good at a couple things. And one of those is self-defense and guns. He owns a gun dealership and everything else, but also communications. He's a geek, in the nicest way of saying it. He is a geek, and I want to geek out with him even more on this stuff. So he and I have been going back and forth. We're going to be redoing the 7 Prep Steps course with his help. And we've been just going over FRS and GMRS and ham radios, and we've just been playing with everything we can and on our cell phones and everything else. So it's been really fun. But you guys are in amazing hands with David here. So I want you guys to give it up for him and bring him up.
Yeah, don't give me 2 mics. Let's double the power. Can you log in on that first though before we? Yeah. So it's really good to be here. My name's David Brilliant. I'm from Cache Valley. I was born in another place, but I grew up most of my life there. And so I have about 10 years of experience in software development. I got my bachelor's degree in computer science at Utah State University almost 10 years ago, which is crazy. But I've been working even during college. I worked for Novak Conversions. Some of you may know them if you're big Jeep guys. I worked for General Motors. Some of you may know them too. Right now, presently, I'm employed with Guru Technologies. Most of what I do is app development, website development, and just anything people show up. I get all kinds of weird requests. I've done some really weird stuff there. And then, as Marcelo noted, I own and run my own company, Crow Mountain Armory, and do firearms and firearms training. Most of my experience is with encryption, communications, e-commerce, application and software design, just a broad range of different skills related particularly to communications. Virtually everything on the web now uses some form of encryption, and I had to get familiar with a lot of that stuff. So it's one of those things I'm really passionate, really interested about. I'm a ham radio technician. I didn't go all the way up to get my general. I didn't see a ton of use in it, but I'll probably go get a higher level ham license in the next couple of years here. And that's a little bit about me. So today, I want to go over in a very high level way how some radios work, some of the frequencies that you're going to see, some of the laws and regulations, but most importantly, we're going to talk about building a comms strategy for comms for communications, right? So when you come up with a plan for emergency preparedness, you have to. Communications is one of those things that kind of gets left by the wayside, right? A lot of us focus on food or defense or water purification, but communications is almost as important. We're community creatures, right? And communications can actually save your life. So I want to tell you a story about how radios literally saved my life. So I was up hiking with a friend, and he was hiking, and I was out on the lake in a kayak, and we had really simple FRS, GMRS radios like these ones and these ones, but I mean they were even more primitive than these guys. So we were just separate, and I told him on the radio, I'm going to go down this little river, and if I don't talk to you in a couple minutes, come look for me. And I went down that river, and what I didn't know was that they had opened the sluice gates to the dam up above, and the river was incredibly high and incredibly fast and incredibly cold. And I wound up hitting my kayak against tree branches that before were high, and now were in the river. And my kayak tipped over. I was holding onto a tree branch for about 20 minutes, and I had to be swift water rescued. But the only way that anybody knew that I was down there is because my friend had heard me on the radio and knew that I didn't check in, and he came down looking for me. And that's what saved my life. So radios and communications in an emergency will save your life, and they cannot be ignored. And it's something that you have to not just, look at, but also, really, really practice with and get used to, because if you don't, it might kill you. So with that heavy thing, I'm going to remind you that this is going to be on the test. So, so we're going to talk about some frequencies, so some vocabulary, and we're going to talk first about frequency. So you're going to hear frequency a lot with radios. Frequency is just how fast the oscillation of the radio signal is, right? So high frequency radio waves have some important properties. They reflect a little bit better on some surfaces, and some surfaces they don't go through. Longer wavelength frequencies go further. So you're going to see, like, your cell phones, they operate on pretty short range frequencies. They're designed to only go max a couple of miles. Some of these radios work on frequencies that are designed to go a lot longer distances. And even some of these radios, like this one, will receive signals that can be transmitted from halfway across the earth or further, depending on weather conditions. But just remember, high frequency is short range, low frequency is long range. And frequencies are measured in hertz, that little HZ, pronounced hertz, H-U-R-T-S, right? So what is radio, right? Radio is light. That's something that like, it's a lot of people don't remember from like high school or may not have been taught at all, but radio is just a form of light. And so it comes off of any surface, just like a light bulb or the sun, in the form of radiation. So a lot of people, you might have heard like cell phone tower radiation, people are concerned about that. It's not radiation like X-rays. Okay, that kind of radiation will go through you and damage you and hurt you in ways that radio cannot. In fact, radio, if you hug your radio, you will dampen the radio. It will not transmit because it can't get through you. So you can still be harmed by radio waves. So like they tell you in the user manuals for all these radios, don't hug the antenna. Don't put it against your skin. Don't eat the antenna. Don't do anything that puts it too close to your body, because if you do, it can actually energize your cells and cook you. Does anybody know how they discovered microwave, like your microwave oven? Candy bars. They had little candy bars in their pockets, and they would walk out to the radio antennas in like World War II time frame, and they would come back, the candy bars were melted. These guys were standing next to, like 1,000 watt transmitters, and they were getting irradiated by the radiation from the antennas, and it was cooking the candy bars. It's also kind of cooking you a little bit. It raises your temperature. So if you get too close to really high intensity, high power radio transmitters, they can hurt you. Don't hug them. Some comparisons to think about, like if you're wondering about high level, like how does a radio really work? Think of these antennas. They're kind of like eyes, and they're also kind of like light bulbs. So they're like eyes in the sense that these can see radio light. And they're like light bulbs because when you energize the radio, when you push that little talk button, this lights up just like a light bulb would. Like if you look inside a light bulb, you see the little filament and it glows, right? This is also glowing, but in radio frequencies. So you can't see it unless you have eyes that can see in the radio spectrum. So you see, like up here we have radio waves all the way past infrared, and here you just have that little visible spectrum. You see that amount of light. Radios see somewhere in that spectrum below infrared. And then you can think of a little radio like this, kind of like a flashlight. And that's really important to remember, because when you start talking about power and range, and I know there's going to be somebody who's going to ask the question tonight, how far can I talk with one of these radios? And the answer is, it depends. Okay, so here's some examples, right? A candle. How many of you can see a candle from 10 feet away? How many of you can see a candle from a mile away? If it's dark, right, that affects it a ton. So the conditions that you're in will affect the ability for you to see the light that comes out of the radio. And you can even turn a tiny little candle into quite a powerful lamp if you put it in the right kind of fixture, right? So you see that old school style car lamp. They used to, literally put a candle in that little lamp, and it would focus the light forward, so you would, instead of getting one candle's worth, you'd get 4 candles worth, or however much the effect of the magnification is. And you can get, you could have a radio as powerful as the sun itself, right? The sun is a giant radio. It's emitting a ton of radio waves. You can, if you had you turn on a radio and you turn the squelch down to 0, and you hear a lot of, you're hearing the radiation that you can pick up from the sun, from the atmosphere, from all kinds of sources out in space. That's what radio telescopes are. You can see stars, except when they're covered by other objects. Like when you have a lunar eclipse, you can have the most powerful sun in the world, and if the moon moves in front of it, you can't see it, right? So if you have physical obstructions between you and the other guy, somebody said line of sight, that's an important word to think of, right? Because if you try to see a light, you may not be able to see it. Now you could see maybe a glow that comes around it, or you could see a reflection of that light. Like for example, when the moon is up, we're seeing the reflection of sunlight on the earth. You can sometimes reflect radio waves. They can come in just like a light wave. but you kind of have to know what you're doing to get that effect out of radios. And most of the radios that you're going to find you can buy without getting licenses and permits. They're going to tell you they're going to limit your range that you can talk at. Most of these, you can really compare them to a flashlight. If you stood on a dark mountaintop at night and you flashed a flashlight, you could see it for a couple of miles, right? This is kind of like that effect that you'll get out of that. So some things to talk about with range and false advertising. So we all have expectations, right? And the expectation is we're going to be able to talk 35 miles, which is what this radio is allegedly advertised to do, right? And that is true if you were on top of a mountain talking to somebody in that valley and there were no trees and no bushes and it was a clear day, there was no smoke, no fog, everything, the stars aligned, angels came out of heaven, right? You could hit 35-mile maximum range with a little tiny low-power radio like this. The reality is that you can't hear the person because there's something in the way. So like I tested these guys out with my nephew. They live about a mile away from me. And inside my house, I pushed down on the button and got nothing. But I walked outside my door 5 feet, and he walked outside his door about 5 feet. We pushed the buttons, and we got communication. Now, it wasn't great, but these will go a mile under less than ideal conditions. But I'm on top of a hill, and he's down a little bit lower. So it all depends on where you're standing at and what you're doing. If you want to get the maximum amount of range out of a radio, what you want to do is climb to the top of the nearest building, tree, your roof, whatever it takes to get up on top and start pushing this transmit button. That'll get you the most range out of any radio. And then there are some ways that you can extend that range with technologies like repeaters, which we'll talk about with, for example, ham radio and GMRS, which we'll get into, will allow you to use repeaters to extend your range every time you talk to another repeater. So let's talk about some radio frequencies that you may encounter as you start researching radios. 3 frequencies you really need to know: HF, VHF, and UHF. HF is for high frequency, very high frequency, and very, originally ultra high frequency. There are some channel allocations, and so you'll hear this too, and it might get confusing when you hear, some people are talking about VHF and UHF. Channel allocations are defined by the FCC or the governing body in your country. They change from country to country, although there are some similarities. So like you'll get, some of these radios are designed to work overseas too. If you travel, they may work overseas. You just have to check the frequencies that they allocate for their country, what you can talk in their country. FRS is the family radio service, and you're most familiar with this kind of little radio, these little Motorola, the low-end talkabouts, and these, some of these higher-end talkabouts, they all operate on the FRS family radio service. GMRS, or General Mobile Radio Service, is a little bit more power and capability, and we'll go over that too. And we got radios like these guys all here. These are all GMRS radios. LMR is Land Mobile Radio. Who was I talking to? Did I die? Nope, I can still hear it. Did you? Okay, never mind. We're good. Somebody was asking me about the Forest Service radios. And those may very well be Land Mobile Radio, right? So MERS, Multiple Use Radio Service, that's another radio service that's not as super popular, but you can reach them on some of the ham radios. And then Citizens Band. How many of you are familiar with Citizens Band? So Citizens Band used to be the way that most people did emergency preparedness. My dad, their old ward in California, I think it wasn't Stockton, it was somewhere in LA. They had a plan that involved deacons running around with Citizen Band handheld radios, trying to communicate over the AM Citizen Band radios. And that was before we had this wealth of amazing radios that have come out in the last 10, 20 years. And then there's ham. Ham is not a acronym. In fact, there's a serious debate about whether or not it actually has a specific definition, but everybody knows what ham radio is. So family radio service. So these are, everybody sees these. We're all familiar with these. We probably used these. They don't require a license, but they are limited to less than half a watt of transmission power. That's the difference between your cell phone flashlight and a real flashlight, right? You're talking about being able to see maybe a little bit, in the dark, but you can really banish the night with some of the new flashlights that are coming out, like 300, 400 lumen flashlights. You just blind people with them, right? They optimistically, they have like a mile or two of real range, and that's flat terrain, no buildings. You start getting inside buildings and you're really tightening it down. There's no real data and text support, although there are some radios that are now trying to support it, and we will show you a pair of those. They're abundant and they're cheap. And they're really easy to use and hard to screw up. So let me talk about those last 2 points. So communication and community have the same root in their word, right? It doesn't do you any good to have a radio and nobody to talk to. I like these things. I know a lot of people have kind of shied away from them for emergency preparedness, but I really like them for 2 reasons. Children and the unprepared. So children are not super good at keeping things, and they're really good at breaking things. And I've got a 1.5-year-old, and he's really good at tearing everything apart. Something like this is impossible to damage. I guess you could submerge it and it would stop working. But if you had a little radio like this, they're so light, the plastic won't break if they drop. They're super easy for you to like keep operating. So you just have to push the button, right, and push the channels to change the channels up and down. And any kid knows how to use that, right? The other thing that you can do is the unprepared. The unprepared have not practiced for emergencies, and they may not know what a radio is. They may not know how to use a radio, but they're still super important, right? You don't want to have your neighbor feel like you are the guy that says, well, you get to go ahead and die in an emergency. He wants to be able to talk to you. You want to be able to talk to him because he has value. He can be labor, manpower, intelligence, anything that you want him to be, but you have to be in communication with him. And if you have 10 of these things kicking around, you can hand them out like candy, right? It's not a big deal for you to give it over to somebody. And having a neighborhood network like that, being able to communicate from house to house in an emergency is super important. When we were here last time, we had the example of the neighbor with maybe the neighbor has medical supplies and maybe the neighbor has food, and how do you coordinate that trade? Well, it's really hard when you're running back and forth, or you're writing letters and sending them on Pony Express and having to get them to your neighbor. Radio communication gives you instant ability to coordinate between a fairly large group of people, and with little radios like this, super easy to do. And something else to consider is many people already have them. I've got a next door neighbor, their kids, they love to play with these little radios. They're toys. Most parents buy a set of these for their kids at some point. They probably gather dust in the basement, and maybe they'll break them out if an emergency happens. It's not a bad idea to keep them around. And it's a really good idea to make a plan that works with these, because you may need to be able to incorporate people who have just this level of preparedness into your emergency preparedness plan for your community. GMRS. This is where we're going to have a big conversation, I think, about what we're going towards in the radio and communications community, and also what I think most people can use. GMRS has some advantages. It uses repeaters. You can transmit up to 50 watts of power. So that's like having one of those big floodlights that they put up at the car shows. They want to attract people at night or whatever, and they put that up in the sky and flash the bat signal around. And then they also have data and text messaging support on a lot more of these devices, and you can actually send data on devices that are not approved for that purpose. You can actually like plug them into your computer and use them that way. Go ahead.
Do the handheld ones actually have 50 watts?
No, you're going to look at like a base station for that. But mobile GMRS radios are getting very small. We're talking about something you could carry in a backpack. It's just not something that you could carry by hand. You'd want to put it in a bag or something. But the handheld radios, you're looking at like 8 to 10 watt transmission power, which is on par with most of the Baofangs that you'd get. Why do I think this is a really good thing to look at? The FCC just lowered the price for the license to use this to $35 for a family. So for $35 plus the cost of your radios, something like $200, you could have an entire family equipped with GMRS radios and able to communicate over relatively long distances.
Is that a family inside a home, or is it?
I just found that out. So it's not only families in the homes, but you could be your brother, your sister,
yeah.
your dad, your father-in-law. Like I when I got mine, I called my whole family and said, "Hey, I paid for a license for everyone," and they're like, "Oh, you're so nice." I'm like, $35.
Yeah, you can be the nice guy in Christmas,
everyone
right?
thinks I'm a hero.
But yeah, so it covers a large amount of your family. So 50, yeah, it depends. 50 watt transmission, and it's only in VHF. No, sorry, UHF. It's only in UHF, so you are limited to line of sight communication and probably at max 50 miles. So if you live in like a mountain valley, you might get the whole valley with your ability to transmit, but only if you're on top of a hill. So I know for a fact that like I can get a 5 watt radio to get out past 5 or 6 miles. So you should have with the handhelds pretty reasonable range for communication. And if you want to use GMRS to perform like linking services to connect, say, like a town to another town, that's a pretty good use case for getting into the 40, 50 watt base station transmitters. You can start to get into that realm.
Just to give you a feel for how big it is, if you can hold up the shortwave radio,
Yeah.
it's just a little bit bigger than that. Can get you 50 watts, 40 to 50 watts, and you can put it in your car.
But you'll want to get, a real nice antenna set up,
Yep.
and again, don't hug the antenna. 50 watts is pretty good. I mean, yeah, go ahead.
It's important for us to know, to be encouraged to get radios, that you don't need a license to operate a radio
In an emergency. Yeah, we'll get to that. But you want to be able to practice with the radios, and you certainly want to be able to use them on a day-to-day basis. And one of the things that's really neat about some of these newer GMRS radios that are starting to come out, this is a Baofeng BTEC Pro. They're building in functionality to interface with your phone as a device that will be able to text and send GPS location. And this is it's like a totally integrated wilderness tool. It has a compass. It has GPS built in. You can use it to communicate between groups of people and create like networks, like subnets, to text to each other, and you get pretty good communication range out of something like this. You add it all up, you get a really good value package for what you're getting into. And so some of these newer radios for this type are getting into like almost like data services that you would normally see in ham radios. They're starting to bring that up. And actually, I wanted to demo something like that with Marcelo. So these, if you can't get you don't want to get the GMRS radios and get that functionality, you can get it with the Motorola Talkabout T800s. And I've got to remember which one is yours. This one's yours. Okay, so the neat thing about these guys are you can use them to text. Ooh, oh, probably to turn on pair. You can use them to text back and forth and talk at the same time. So I've got the Talk About app here, and I'm going to go ahead and send Marcelo a message. And you're going to hear on the radios, some of the ones that we have on this frequency are going to light up. Did you guys hear that? Let me turn that volume up over here.
Thanks, right. And by the way,
Is it paired to your phone?
It should be paired to my phone.
Okay, let me retry it.
It should be. Yeah. And by the way, my kids, instead of getting them used to getting cell phones later on, we have them carry around this, and it's kind of funny because I have my daughter Ember, and I go, Ember, come in. She goes back to me. She calls me poopy diaper.
You're not paired. That's what's up.
Is that what it is?
Yeah, hang on.
Oh, what do you want?
No, you're not paired on Bluetooth. Your phone shut off from Bluetooth.
Let's take it.
There we go. Now, there we go.
There it goes.
Okay, let me try that again. So yeah, you'll hear the modem sounds. It'll sound like an old. There we go. Aha! Success. Yeah, it should be in your shout. I got the confirmation you received it.
Okay, there it is.
Yep.
Okay, right there. Little text came through. And the cool thing about it is you can actually be in the middle of the wilderness,
Yes.
right? Without any cell phone or anything like that, with a map.
These can kind of become like a cell phone tower, mini cell phone tower. Yeah.
So you two communicated. Who else is listening to you?
That's a good question. So since we're using FRS, literally anybody who can hear FRS communications can hear that.
Okay, so if you're trying to wait, your big brother.
I will talk about that. I've got a slide just for that question. Talk about T800s. Don't get the lower end talkabouts. They're expensive for very little functionality. The T800 is actually worth it. You start looking at like, oh, hey, you can actually do interesting things that you would not otherwise be able to do with like low end basic radios, right? That's probably the lowest priced entry level FRS radio I would buy for myself, right? I'd buy again, these hand out like candy, children, whoever, right? You start getting older people, FRS one.
And just give you a feel, these right here, probably $12. Well, 15.
10, it's literally 10. If you buy the multi packs of like 6, it's $60 to get a multi pack.
These are the throwaway ones. You just if
Yeah.
the kids ruin it, they ruin it. But $10 is nothing.
These are like $50 a piece, you know.
These are the ones that I would use before those, but those are throwaway.
What's the range for texting with these?
So it's a little shorter than the actual radio communication because you get some loss as you get further out. The data drops out, but it'll go about as far as the radio will transmit. So 2 miles realistically. Again, the advertised distance that they give you on the Motorola website is allegedly 35 miles, but I really doubt you'll get that with data transmission. Again, optimistically on a hill, angels. So yeah, so with GMRS, you're getting into some of the ability to do data modes like that as well. So this is kind of like a crossover between FRS and GMRS. Now we're starting to get into actual GMRS. One of the real advantages to GMRS is FRS radios can hear you too. So this is on an FRS channel right now, and they're legally allowed to talk on low power modes. And if I push this button, testing, should be on GMRS 4.
Power on. Full. Power on. Full.
Testing. So now you can hear them on the little FRS radios. So you're starting to get some functionality to cross over. So like I imagine, for example, you got some kids, right? You hand out these to the kids. And then you've got some adults in your neighborhood, and they have more powerful 5-watt radios. Even if your kids are out of communication range to talk back to you, you can talk to them. And who doesn't want to talk to their kids without their kids talking back to them? So, so if you have the ability to sit with like a base station that's a 50 watt, you could pump out a message and say like, hey kids, I need you to come home. It's starting to get dark, and they can come in. They can hear you, and you can have some cross-compatible communication. You start unlocking other features like the ability to use repeaters, and you can start using these as a way to communicate even longer distances. Some places are getting GMRS repeaters more often now. You can buy mobile repeater base stations. They come as kits, and you can put them on a vehicle, or you can put them in strategic locations in your emergency preparedness area and be able to communicate over relatively long distances. I'm not going to touch too long on LMR. You kind of have to be a business to use the land mobile radio service. It unlocks some really special spooky powers. This is like the kind of radio that your police department has. It will give you encryption, not unbreakable encryption, but it will give you encryption, and a little bit more privacy. If you're really worried about preparedness, or say you have like a more professional plan for your emergency preparedness, like a company that you've gotten everybody to buy into or something like that, you might be able to look at these. Not a bad idea. You can also, most of these radios, you can reprogram them to work on regular radio frequencies. This is a nice Motorola digital radio, and a lot of these are used in a commercial use for LMR, but they are programmable to use on regular GMRS and ham radio frequencies. MERS, not super popular, but you can use it. It's power capped at 2 watts. It's going to give you a better range and a little bit better performance over hills, but again, you're capped at 2 watts. So this is relative to these guys, right? You're not going to get much more distance. You'll get more distance over bad terrain than you would with those guys. They've got 5 channels, so you're going to have to worry about crowding. That's something that I didn't talk about with FRS and GMRS as much, but you have a limited selection of channels. So you may have issues with, if you have many people all talking at the same time, you could have a lot of information getting lost, or a lot of people crowding out channels and not able to talk on them. GMRS does better because it has more channel space. There's like 22 channels or something that you can actually use with GMRS. FRS, you're limited to 16. You're even less with MERS. But the good thing is not as many people use it. So depends on your area. You may want to look at this instead of FRS, especially if you're trying to prepare a community that's more rural than a community that's more urbanized, where your FRS radios would perform a little better. Citizens band, it's still unlicensed. You get 40 channels. You get up to 4 watt transmission power, but it's not very popular anymore. The reason why is it is AM, not FM. Without getting too deep into radio wizardry, it doesn't sound super good. So if you turn on your AM radio, I remember when I was listening to Rush Limbaugh on AM radio, and it was, you listen to him on FM, and it's crystal clear, right? FM radio has much better sound qualities. That's why we wound up going to it. That's why AM's dying. Citizens Band is starting to allow some FM transmission, but most of the radios don't work on it. So it's not super good for that. They do have cheap and abundant radios. They're all over the place. You can get the Citizens Band truck radios or whatever, super easy, super cheap, and they go a pretty long distance. And then there's ham. So I had this, go ahead.
On the Citizens Band, that single sideband worked very well.
Yeah, so he says the Citizens Band single sideband worked pretty well. I don't have a lot of experience with it, so I'll take your word for it. But it's definitely, I wouldn't not count it out as a tool, especially if you have people who have the equipment or it's not too far out of your way to get there. But if I was starting from scratch, I don't know if I would consider it. It's a little hard to find some of the newer features. Ooh. Speaking of listening to other people, it. No, it's probably somebody at like the Smiths over there on their little radio telling somebody to get to the checkout stand. So I'm hesitant to recommend it because there's so many new features that are coming out with radios that allow you to do digital integration, and the digital stuff is where a lot of the exciting things are happening, like the ability to text. We'll talk about some digital options for being able to have cell phone communication services and stuff like that. That stuff comes more with some of these other features like ham. Ham radio, most of you are familiar with ham radio, but it requires a license. Everybody's familiar with that part of it. It requires a test. So a lot of people are intimidated by that, and it takes them a little bit more work to get into. There's a broad range of frequencies. I mean, there's tons of stuff you can do with ham radio. If you really want to get into the hobby, this is where you got to be at. This is fun. You can get into all kinds of interesting stuff with ham radio. It's got your best options for transmission power, 1.4 kilowatt maximum, depending on which frequency you are on, and a huge selection of radios, a cornucopia, one might say. But it is more technically challenging. If you go down this route, you need to practice with your ham radios. This is something where you're going to if you're going to get your ham license, get involved with the ham radio community. Start doing stuff. I do, occasionally I'll do events where like they have pace cars for runners and bicyclists, and you go out and you pace people as they go out and do races. And you're going to learn how to use your ham radio and how to work in a team and how to communicate over long distances and use repeaters and all of these things that will be very useful skills for you in an emergency. It's a perishable skill. You have to practice it. You may need to practice less with GMRS, but if you get into ham, you need to keep practicing. Yes?
So I bought a ham radio, we got license and all that.
Mm-hmm.
Since then, all the stores are gone, there's no subject matter experts. Say, my wife and I got licensed in this about 15 years ago. Now there's nowhere you can buy these things in a storefront. They seem like all the ones we ever looked at were gone. And there's nobody, we've been trying to get people to even come to our stake to help get our system back on track. It's like, it's so good and so powerful, but try to find a subject matter expert to help you.
So first stop is the ARRL. And that's the Amateur Radio Relay League. It's actually founded here in Utah. There are a ton of chapters all over the world, but there's plenty of chapters here in Utah. And you can get them to help you with setting up classes, setting up tests. That's where your community is. And ultimately, right, like you are part of the community. So if you're having trouble finding those people, you may need to become that person. And I know that's an uncomfortable shoe to step into. It's definitely uncomfortable for me sometimes. But as you start to become that person, you start to look at resources online and reading books and stuff like that, you can start to actually share that information with other people. And I highly encourage you to get involved with your local ARRL chapter. Marcelo?
I was going to make a little... Do you have... There it is. So anyway, one more point with this. We're talking FRS, GMRS, and ham. I'm just going to leave out the MERS and everything else because those are the three things you need to focus on. FRS is the easiest. GMRS is going to be a little bit harder to do. Ham is a lot harder to do. If you think about it, the harder it is, the less people are going to be on it. Does that make sense? During an emergency, the harder it is, okay? The more you know, the more you're going to be able to get through when other people can't get through because everybody's trying to talk on the radio. So it depends on how much you want to put into this.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Is this a realistic thing to do with a family? Or does everybody have to have their ham radio license?
Everybody has to have a ham radio license to transmit. You can listen legally without any concerns. And as was said before, in an emergency, everybody can transmit. What I would say is the ideal situation in my mind is every family has at least one licensed ham operator. And then everybody in the family has a GMRS license that you can use for the whole family. So if you have that kind of situation set up where you can use these GMRS radios on more localized communication, and you leave the ham radio set up for the person who actually knows how to use it. And you may not need even at the family level, like if you have a plan that involves your community, your church, like larger family, if you have many family members living near you. You may not need more than one ham radio operator in your immediate group, but you should pick somebody who has subject matter interest and devote resources and energy to that person, and that person should spend their resources and energy preparing for the communication side of preparedness, because this can be expensive as well.
So you can communicate with. So you can communicate with a MRS.
With
I mean, not MRS, but
GMRS.
GMRS. You can, with a ham radio, you can communicate with
yeah,
GMRS radio.
Many ham radios will allow you to communicate on GMRS frequencies. And of course, if you have the family license, you can actually just have an extra GMRS radio for the ham license, the licensed ham operator.
If you're getting a ham radio, you might want to check on that also to see if they
Yes.
need to unlock it.
Yeah.
So sometimes they need to unlock it for GMRS.
Yeah, I've got all of my radios unlocked for GMRS frequencies. So, last up, I want to talk about shortwave. Shortwave radio is, as I heard described by one of my favorite YouTubers, is the warlord's radio. He described a situation where some warlord in Afghanistan had a terrible thing happen to him. He gets on the shortwave radio and he starts rallying up all his troops with the shortwave radio. And one of the nice things about the shortwave radios is that they operate in these HF bands, which travel long distances. How many of you are familiar with Voice of America? Some of you have heard of it. We use Voice of America to penetrate deep into countries like China and Russia, where they have censorship and broadcast American news. And that you use shortwave radio to do that. The big advantages are, you can listen in incredibly long distances away. Let's say you have an emergency, and it's incredibly localized. They always tell you, turn on your AM radio to whatever on the highway signs, you see that, for emergency information. Well, AM radio, max range, 30, 60 miles, depends on the conditions it's in, where the tower's at. I know, for example, 610 KVNU, where I live, you cannot hear it outside the valley. So if I turn on 610 and try to listen to it here in Salt Lake as I'm driving home to an emergency in Logan, I won't be able to get any information out of that radio. But if there is somebody who is on shortwave and they broadcast from Cache Valley, I might be able to hear it. So if you have a shortwave radio, you might be able to get in news broadcasts and ham radio broadcasts from a longer distance away. And it shares some frequencies with ham radio, so a lot of people with ham radio general licenses might be able to talk on it. Those are the different ham radio license levels. I'll skip that actually. These are the bands, and you can actually see, where is it? 30 meters, 10.1 megahertz, and 20 meters, and 17 meters, all the way up to 12 meters. Those bands are shared in common with these radios. So if you have people who are in your community that can actually broadcast on those frequencies and are used to it and have the equipment to do so, you might be able to hear radio updates from those people without having to go buy a $1,000 ham radio setup just to listen.
Just to put a little more plug on the short waves, and I can't remember, is it the ionosphere that hits off?
Yeah.
It's the ionosphere.
Yeah.
So what happens is somebody could be in England. I mean, we're talking about it goes up, comes down, 1,000 miles away, and you can hear it. That's why, this reminds me of, World War II and Germany and them tuning in to hear what's happening around the world. That's what shortwave is. So just give you a feel.
Yeah. Go ahead.
The shortwave, we're just talking about reception, not transmission.
These radios only reception. Yeah. I mean, like I said, if you get your ham license and you want to transmit, you can. But yeah, we've got a bunch of these over here. I'd highly recommend picking up some of these because the emergency radios you can typically buy, they've got AM, FM. That's it. It's nice to have that, I guess, shortwave 1 and 2, so extra 2 frequencies that you can listen into that will give you a little bit longer distance in your communication range in case you have an emergency that destroys radio towers in your local community. You may not be able to get those radio updates unless you have a radio that can pick up longer distances. So really quickly, laws and regulations. Really basic stuff, like we got to be nice on these things. We share these frequencies. They are community property. No swears, no politics, no encryption, asterisk. No music. Incidental music is fine, but you can't start your own pirate music radio station. Speaking of the no swears and no music, my dad actually, when he was a kid, he ran a radio station in the LA area with his friend, a little amateur radio station, low power transmission, but he reached into some wires and touched two things that shouldn't be touched. And he shocked himself and he let out a word you're not supposed to say according to the FCC. And they pulled the license for this radio station to transmit. There was an FCC, back then there were actually FCC minders that really were listening into your communications, and they heard it and they pulled his license. You need to stay within your power limits. So, I mean, technically, this radio can transmit 5 watts on an FRS channel. Please don't do that. You'll upset some people, and you may very well damage some radio equipment that's not designed to receive that level of power. So, just be careful. Most of these radios have low power transmit modes. You can set that on the channel. And use the correct radio for the correct transmission. So I am obligated by lawyers and the law to say that you are not permitted to transmit this radio on the FRS frequencies because the radio is not designed to do so, and the antenna is not fixed, and it doesn't meet certain part requirements from the FCC. So, they've actually cracked down on some of these Baofangs that are unlocked, the importation of them as the unlocked mode. They're not supposed to be done. But good news is that people have started to just basically repackage. This is the R Pro. Do I have? Well, yeah, the Ocean. This guy is actually just a repackaged version of their ham radio, and it is channel locked to GMRS, so you can't use it to go do anything that you're not supposed to do. So some important notes. So you mentioned anybody can listen to you. That is true. All radio transmissions are like this. Your cell phone is like this. Anyone can listen to your cell phone conversations. Now, they may listen to okay, because it's encrypted, but they're going to listen to it. They can hear it. They can actually use your transmissions to triangulate your location. You transmit on this thing long enough, they can just, oh yeah, you transmitted from here. Now, there are some positives and negatives to that, right? The positive being you can use, like I said, radios like this. Anyone can listen. Well, that's great. Your whole community can listen into these radios. You don't want to transmit anything private or personal on a radio. You should never do that. I am shocked by the number of people who transmit things that are private and personal on Facebook, on Twitter, on any form of social media. These are broadcast mediums, which means anyone can hear you. So be careful what you say on these. It might get you in trouble. It might get you in trouble in an emergency, especially longer-term emergencies. There may be people who are using radios for malicious purposes. You cannot know that. You will not know that until someone comes knocking at your door trying to steal your food. So my suggestion is you do not have this transmission conversation. Johnny, I have 1,000 pounds of rice over here. Can you come pick it up? That's not what you want to say on your radio, right? Arranging times to meet, good ways to talk to people, exchanging immediate information whose usefulness will die in like 10 minutes. That's great on the radio, right? I'm here right now. Come go. Let's come get me, right? That's the kind of thing you want to transmit on a radio.
David, can you please, when we get back to Logan, talk to my daughter about calling me poopy diaper over the radio, because it's really, really embarrassing, and everyone's hearing that, and that seems pretty personal to me. I mean, if my diapers are poopy, that's my business, right?
Absolutely.
Is that what it is?
You do not require a license to own any radio or purchase a radio. All this equipment is totally free for you to buy. There's no limitation on that. You can listen at any time. Anyone can listen, right? It is always legal to transmit during an emergency. Now, what does that mean? I don't know. I suppose if you had an emergency, you would know, right? If you have a bona fide emergency is what they say. So your daughter may think a poopy diaper is a bona fide emergency. I don't know if the FCC will agree with her. But if it is a bona fide emergency, it's okay. Nobody's going to come after you. No ham radio operator is going to get mad at you for transmitting on a frequency, even if it breaks something, even if it makes their lives uncomfortable. If you get on here and you say, I am so-and-so, I am at this location, I am declaring an emergency, please come get me, someone probably will hear that and they have a chance of coming to get you. We talked about the ARRL and other affiliates. If you're going to get involved in ham radio, please join the ARRL, join your local group, support them. You can get news and resources at QRZ now for ham radio. And the GMRS Association, USA GMRS, they're kind of new and up and coming. Like I said, with a lot of these ham radio things, this is getting to be a new thing people are really interested in. And these communities are growing. So let's talk lastly about building a strategy. Let's dispel some myths first of all. So you can talk around the world on my radio, right? We talked about skip. Skip is unreliable. There is no radio that will consistently and easily communicate across the world. That is why we launched satellites. Satellites are far more easy for you to communicate long distances and bounce them off of other satellites, and you get much better reception. So we switched to that because radio is not reliable. You will find that your radio, when it works in one location, does not work in many locations. I turned on this radio to my NOAA weather station radio channels. I cannot receive it standing right here. If I walk outside that door, I get the NOAA weather station, but only if I'm turned facing that direction. So it doesn't always work. You may need to adjust your plans accordingly, yes.
No, is that the one that comes from the airport out here?
I don't know where they exactly have the transmitter, but they strategically position NOAA weather transmitters all over the United States. There's almost nowhere where you can't get a weather report from NOAA. Another myth that people have is that all these radios or all technology in general will be down or useless in my particular disaster event. A lot of people are worried about EMPs. A lot of people are worried about coronal mass ejections. Your radios, again, asterisk, may work in those situations. It all depends on what radiations are used and how it damages the atmosphere. And there's a lot of scientific jargon and mumbo jumbo that goes into that. But the important thing to remember is if you're worried about this, take this radio, take the antenna off, take the battery out, put these separately all into a Faraday bag or a Faraday cage, leave it there. It'll be fine. Once everything dies down, you can put these back together, but in the middle of an emergency that damages your ability to communicate with radio, even short-range radios will see degradation in signal. Long-range radios just won't work at all. So, yep, like that. But even under situations where you get like CMEs, right? My short-range radios work during CMEs. We had one just recently. They'll still run. Your range is limited. You might pick up a lot of background noise. You need to turn up your squelch. Coronal mass ejection, so the sun like spits out a bunch of particles at the earth. And then, yeah, solar flare. So the next myth, I'm not smart enough to use these. You're always smart enough to use some kind of radio. It's super easy to use these. If that's all you can use this. If you want to dedicate the time and energy into it, you can learn how to use any of these. I promise you, anybody can learn how to use these radios. Yes, Marcel?
Is this on right here?
No.
Anyways,
There we go.
my daughter is 6 years old. My son is 3 years old, and they can use those.
Yeah.
So anybody can do it. Okay.
Some people have unrealistic expectations. The bow thing in the bottom of my bag that I never use is going to be enough in an emergency. That is not true. You're going to pull this thing out. It has like 20 buttons. All of them do something. There's a million little modes in the menu. If you're not used to the idea of how to use it, you need to practice with it. If you don't have time to practice with it, downgrade your strategy to something that you can actually learn how to use. Another concern people have is I want to stay in constant contact. It's not really realistic. Like I said, radios can be unreliable. You pop up over a mountain, it works. You pop down to the valley, it doesn't. You have dead spots, just like old school cell phone signals, right? There was always times where we would lose reliability. We had to build billions of dollars of cell phone network infrastructure to replace, to get to a point where we're even kind of reliable. So if we're going to go back to using handheld radios, you're going to have to lower your expectations about how reliable the radio network will be. Now, you can get these things to be quite reliable from site to site. You can get these to be pretty reliable in short-range communications, but constant contact is probably not realistic. And then the other unrealistic expectation many people have is that they want perfectly secure communications that no one can ever know about. Radios are, again, public information. You broadcast, everybody hears. And if you put out something out there, people will hear it. There are some options for encryption, but even those options for encryption, they can still be decrypted. It just takes more time. So like even AES 256 encryption, which is used commonly for all of your radio devices like your cell phones, your Wi-Fi, that can all be broken. It's just a question of time and effort and energy put into it. So you can never really expect to have perfectly secure communications. I found this Twitter post. Loadout tip: don't worry about incorporating a radio into your tactical SHTF or bug out setup. It won't do you any good. Not because comms aren't important, but because you don't have any friends who would talk to you anyway. Subscribe to me for more tactical advice. So friendship is the best ship, right? When you have a situation where you need to use radios and you don't have anybody to talk to, why have a radio, right? If your plan is, I'm going to be the lone wolf survivor and you're going to wander out into the wilderness and you're not going to talk to anybody and you're not going to see anybody, don't buy a radio. Have friends. Build a community. That's what these radios are for. If you build a community and you have friends, you're going to wind up with a better strategy and the ability for you to come up with what you actually need. You need to have people to communicate to. So the first thing is inventory your needs. Map out all the locations that you need to communicate to. Okay, USGIS makes great maps, find them. Google Earth, anything. I would suggest that once you've mapped out a location, test your radio. See how far you can get. Just have somebody drive in one direction, north, south, east, west, right? Drive until you can't hear them anymore. And then mark a little X on that map. Draw a circle. That's your maximum range, right? That'll tell you where you have dead spots too. Go ahead.
Go back to the other screen with your that. Did you get a picture of it?
So like if you have dead spots in your plan, you need to know about them, right? You find locations where you can't communicate, mark them, know where they're at. Determine the number of users. Are we talking about preparing a family, 5, 6 people? Are we talking about preparing a community, 100 people? Are we talking about preparing a city, 1,000 people, 2,000 people, more? Determine the type of information you want to transmit. Are you talking about voice only? Data? Are we talking about being able to even have like some limited internet service, right? You can transmit a lot of different information with radio. So decide if you just want to have voice communications, that's fine. If you want to get into texting, you can get radios like this. Research available repeaters. There are a ton of community repeaters operated by different groups and radio relay leagues. So there's like 2 repeaters in the Cache Valley area, Mount Logan and Promontory Point, that I can hit. Both of them have different functionalities. I've learned all about them. I've used them before. Go ahead, Marcel.
Hey, Dave, can you, we never explained what a repeater is.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, just go ahead and explain that real quick.
So repeaters allow you to repeat the signal that you transmit out of the radio. So if you are, say, in a valley somewhere and you push the talk button and you're talking to a repeater, the repeater hears you, and then on a different channel, it transmits back out the message you sent. So it extends your range effectively to whatever the range of the repeater is. So you can kind of piggyback off that to be able to extend your effective communication range to maybe another valley. I use the repeater network in the northern Utah area. You can link repeaters together. And I've been able to use 2 or 3 repeaters to cover an area from the middle of Cache Valley all the way up to Malad, Idaho, and back down. And you can cover that with little handhelds. This is the handheld I used because they're hearing, they've got better antennas, they have better eyes, and they have better flashlights on top of the hill. So they're broadcasting much more powerful radio signals that you can hear a long distance away. You need to inventory your abilities next. What do I know? What am I willing to learn? And let's be honest here. Like, you have to be honest with yourself, because if you're not willing to go through with the ham license, pick a GMRS radio, pick an FRS radio. Consider children and the elderly. So you may have people who may not even be able to transmit on a radio. They're too small. They lack physical strength, or maybe they don't even have the ability to hear, right? You may need to have different accommodations for them. You have to ask yourself, how much time do you have to dedicate? If it's a lot, put a lot of energy into it. Come out with a better plan and incorporate yourself into maybe being the ham radio guy for your neighborhood. And how much money do you have to dedicate to it? If you don't have a lot, stick with small radios. Short range communication is the cheapest to get into. Don't worry about long distance communication.
Question.
Yes.
Are there YouTube refresher courses?
Absolutely.
That's what I need.
Ham radio crash course is a good one. He does like night or weekly streams, and they talk about all different subjects in the ham radio world. Not a Rubicon Productions is kind of the same guy for GMRS. He does a lot of reviews, but he also like shows examples of what you can do. But yeah, I would pop on YouTube, ham radio refresher course, ham radio test prep. Those would all be good things to look up, and you can find those.
Check the brand of mine to find out if they, YouTube for it.
They might.
What for those online?
He was asking if there are online resources you can access to refresh on ham radio. So there's all kinds. Just seriously, get on YouTube. YouTube has a huge community for ham radio. Most of what I learn comes from YouTube. I watch a lot of people who are into this, and I'm learning all these different things from them. Go ahead.
Someone from our Zoom asked a question, what radio would be good for 40 to 50 miles across town?
I would be looking at a base station type radio. There was a TYT. Let me.
TYTs go good for ham.
Yeah, I can't remember what the exact number. I think it was 9,000 something, 9,800. Anything in that series, take a look at that. It's like a multi-band ham radio, but you're looking at a base station or a car mobile radio at that point.
Yeah, if you're going to do GMRS, you're probably going to want to do the Ocean 1000G.
That one too.
And
yeah.
that one's a really good one for GMRS. And that's Ocean is spelled WOUXAN.
Yeah. WOUXAN. Or XUN, sorry.
XUN, you're right.
My Chinese is really rusty.
Are you okay with questions?
Yeah, we can do some Q&A.
Can you pick up a CB signal on a ham radio?
Not really, no. Ham radios are FM, so a CB signal, unless it's in FM mode, your radio will kind of probably ignore it or not be able to decode it. You'll probably hear interference on the channel, so you'd hear like, but you wouldn't hear what they're actually saying.
Do you think that in a personal emergency that an Alexa would be useful? I've noticed that there are some things that she has followed when we haven't even used her name. And it's kind of frightening, really, but
You know, as an alternative to Life Alert, maybe. If you're worried about like a personal situation where like I've fallen, I can't get up, I'm injured, I can't get off the floor. I actually helped a guy. He had a degenerative neural condition. His toes wouldn't work anymore, basically, and he had fallen. And I just happened to hear him as I was walking home to my apartment, and broke into his house, and found him there on the ground, and he couldn't get up. But if you have like an Alexa or a Google Home and you're close to it, you can turn them on and use it to call emergency services. I know that's a functionality they have. Yes?
I think somebody right there first.
Oh, go ahead.
Hi, if you're in a GMS base station.
GMRS.
GMRS
yeah.
base station. And, hello? Yeah,
There.
okay. if you're in a GMRS base station and your wife is on the other side of the valley with a handheld, she could probably hear you, but could she broadcast back to you?
Probably not. But she definitely could hear you if you have line of sight in that communication situation. You raised your hand.
If there's a grid failure, how long will cell phones operate?
That really depends on your cell phone infrastructure. Some stations have battery backups. I know, for example, I use Rise Broadband, and their internet towers, they're a wireless tower, and they have battery backups and solar that keep them running for quite a while. But it really depends on if it's been upgraded like that. Not all cell phone towers have that level of infrastructure.
And let me ask you this, because we're getting a lot of questions. Are you okay? Are you done? Or did you
I
want
want to cover just a couple quick topics before we get too much.
Sounds
further
good. We
into
got about
Q&A.
20 more minutes. Do you want to hold off on questions?
Yeah, let's hold off on questions for a sec. Okay, so let's talk about thinking outside the box for a second. So we've talked about all these little ham radios and FRS, GMRS. There's some really interesting solutions that don't require you to abandon the modern world and reduce yourself back to radio. One of them, that little purple box over there, that is a SMS mesh. There's a lot of different companies that are producing stuff like this. That one happens to be Meshtastic. It's an open source one. If you're really technical and you're interested, that's kind of cool technology, because what it does is it is a little radio inside there, pairs up to your cell phone through Bluetooth, like these radios and this radio, and you can text regular SMS text messages. It meshes with other nodes, so if you have 2 or 3 people who have the same device paired to their phone, each of you becomes a cell phone tower. And as you move and interact with each other, you send messages to each other, and it stores and retransmits the messages. So if you have a group of hikers, for example, and you all have those strapped onto your backpacks, you might be able to get a couple miles worth of texting range out of it. And you don't need to go invest in specialized radio equipment. You just have to buy these. They're like $30. Figure them out, pair them up to your phones, and walk around with them. Garmin InReach. This is cool stuff. I've seen these get more and more popular. I have a good friend. He backpacks. He has one of these. It's great. You can send emergency text messages without having to pay for a plan. It's things like, come help me, I'm at these grid locations, right? That kind of stuff. And then you can pay for a plan that will let you text more complicated messages, I think up to like 100 characters or something, like let your wife know to put the beans on for when you get home or something. So these are kind of cool for like backcountry people, or if you're interested in really last-ditch radio communications. Satellites will work for a long time in most emergencies, unless you're talking about some kind of like national destroying emergency. But even then, satellites will probably keep running for a little while. And lastly, this sounds really funny. You can set up a neighborhood Wi-Fi mesh. There's no reason you can't have an intranet running on little modems, or not modems, routers, right? Set up a whole little neighborhood with these, and they all repeat off of each other. And you could put a little Plex server on there. Don't let anybody know about it. You could have that functionality. You could still set up like a little neighborhood bulletin board. You don't need the internet for that. It's all just the same local communications that you would use locally as you would use for the internet. So you can actually set those kinds of things up. Lots of different radios we use in our lives for all kinds of different things. You might even be able to keep them running long after an emergency has happened. Privacy and security. So I'm going to skip the expectations. The reality is your radio encryption can be broken. Transmissions reveal your location. Privacy tones are not for privacy. We had some conversations, me and Marcelo, about there's some of these have like, they call them subchannels sometimes, but they're really called privacy tones. And it's just a way for this radio to say, I ignore anything that doesn't start with this little sound that it transmits, like a little tone that goes, boop, but in a frequency you can't hear. Big tip, if you get these radios, turn those tones off. Find out how to turn them off, because if you have a situation where you can push that button, literally all these radios will hear that transmission, but you won't hear them talk to you. It's not really privacy. It's actually reverse privacy. You've made yourself isolated from other people, not you haven't isolated yourself from others. So turn that off, because you could find yourself in an emergency where you're pushing down on that button, you're panicking, like, please help me, please help me.
I'll explain it a little bit more. Do you see that little 4 on the top right there and a 0 underneath? Okay, usually it starts with a 4 and a 1, but this one has a 0. The 0 means the tones are off, but if you want to, you can go to 4, 1, 4, 2, 4, 3, 4, 4, 4, all the way to 99, basically. Okay, and what happens is if you have one of those tones turned on, so you channel 4 and it's 0, everybody can talk to everybody. That's a really good thing during an emergency. But say, for example, I'm hiking, we're at the lake, and I want people to be able to hear me, but I don't want everybody talking to me, right? Then I can change it to 427 or 4 something nobody else is going to be on. What that means is when I talk to him and he's on 427 and I'm on 427, everybody in the world can hear when we transmit. But when I talk, okay, if anybody tries to talk back to me, we won't hear them. But if I talk to him, he'll hear me.
Yeah.
And
push the transmit button over there.
Test 1, 2, check. See, nothing. You hear that?
But if I'm on my privacy tone, right? Privacy tone. Oh. Check.
You hear that? So when he speaks or I speak, everyone can hear it. When they try to speak back to us, we can't hear them. We can only hear each other. Does that make sense? So it makes sense if we're at the lake with a ton of people with a bunch of these, right? But it doesn't make sense in an emergency when we need to talk to everyone. Make sense?
Yeah. And I strongly suggest turning off privacy tones, anything like that for emergency communications, because like I said, you can find yourself screaming into the void, and there's nothing more terrifying than yelling for help and not hearing anybody call back. 99% of all communications shouldn't be encrypted. If you're pushing down talk on that radio, it should be because you want everybody to hear you. Radio etiquette and some tradecraft. Keep your transmissions short. Don't talk over people. Don't talk forever. Don't read out War and Peace on your radio. Stay mobile. If you're worried about people finding out where you're at, keep moving, right? If you need to use coded messages like call signs or even one-time pads, which I'll show you, I have an app for. That helps increase a little bit of your brevity, right? So like if you use 10 codes, for example, police 10 codes, you can use those. It shortens the amount of time you transmit. Limit use of radios only for time-sensitive communication, and any message transmitted is now public knowledge. Assume that. One-time pad. I'm going to plug myself for a little bit. I built an app called Dead Drop that does one-time pads. And it will let you encrypt and decrypt short messages, and it creates highly secure random encryption keys. And you share these key pads in person. So you have a QR code, your buddy scans your phone, and then he has your encryption pad for that message. You can send a message one time with that pad. And that pad will encrypt your message so that you can communicate secretly. So if you're worried about the government coming after you, this is actually kind of a cool little app, fun little app that I built.
By the way, can they take a picture of that?
Yeah, if you scan it, it's only for Android. So if you have an iPhone, I'm sorry, I do not have $2,000 to set up my iPhone development process. So, I'll give everybody a minute.
And those online can do the same thing, by the way.
Yes. So this is a fun little app. It's if you do want to use it to make little you can use it as a toy app. Honestly, I send like some fun little messages to my nephew sometimes. It's just like hi there, and it's like, okay, well, you send it encrypted. These are links to the different radios. I really highly recommend this GMRS Pro. This is a really fantastic radio, solid communications capability. It will work on a lot of different frequencies in the UHF band, and it pairs to your phone. There's an app for it. It's fantastic. You can program it from the app. You don't need like specialized programming equipment to program it, so it's really easy. The Motorola talk about T800s, these guys, like I said, if you don't want to go through the trouble of getting the licenses, you want a cheaper radio for kids to play around with, or if you want to just test out that texting ability, see if you want to use it, fantastic. We've enjoyed these. They're actually pretty cool. I've been impressed. Has everybody got a chance for that one?
What's the freebie?
The one-time pad? We're good?
No.
Yeah, okay. I might have you scan it after if it's not coming up.
Ready.
Okay. Baofeng GT22s. These are these little guys. That's the 6-pack. Just get it. It's super cheap. You'll want these to hand out to people. And the Wuxing UV9D. Marcelo really likes this. This is really cool. It has some additional channels you can listen to, like your weather radio.
And I think I didn't get the UV9D right there. I think I brought the
the 935G Plus,
which is a really good one. So this one,
shoot.
both of them are really good. So this is going to have a little bit more radios, different stations. This is going to be more weather resistant.
That's right.
You can soak this, winds, water, everything. It's just built more like a tank. So I kind of went in between those two. I picked the 835G, but the UV9D is also a good one.
Yeah, all the radios I have up here, except for some of my digital mode radios, they're all water resistant or waterproof. It's so cheap now. I'd highly recommend going that direction instead of buying super cheap radios. So yeah, make your plan. Count the number of radios, determine your radio ranges, determine plans for repeater use, identify your dead zones, and determine if you will include vehicles in your plan. You might want to get better radios for your vehicles. I can help you plan. If you have a real interest in like how to get these plans together, contact me. I can put a plan like this together for you. Get licensed. Really, seriously, it's easier than you think. It unlocks your ability to do a lot of really cool stuff. Pro tip, the government already knows who you are and where you live. So I wouldn't worry too much about that. Please join your local radio club. We already talked about that. Q&A.
Awesome. And you brought some cards?
I've got business cards.
So if anybody wants any cards afterwards to talk to them, that'd be awesome. Let's turn this up just a tiny bit, so I don't have to get it so close.
We got 10 minutes?
Yeah, we got about 7 minutes.
7 minutes, okay.
So in the event that there is an emergency, does like FRS, GMS, are there like preferred frequencies that we should be listening to or transmitting on?
For FRS and GMRS, honestly, if you're looking for somebody to hear you, just turn it on 1. Most people they never bothered to change the radio. So
and just a little side note of what you're talking about also, you got to remember the GMRS and the FRS. FRS, again, baby bear, mama bear, daddy bear for, I guess these days, mama bear is the queen, right? Okay, so daddy bear, mama bear, right? So anyways, if you're thinking about FRS and GMRS, you got to remember that you got half a watt compared to 5 watts, sometimes 4 or 5 watts. There are a lot of them are the same stations. They pass or they cross over quite a bit. But if you have a GMRS, okay, I'm going to be out talking you all day long, okay, because you don't have enough power to outdo my GMRS. So
I just wonder if there's like a standard, like if this is the channel that people will be transmitting on.
There's not a standard decided on emergency channel. I would literally, like I said, just 1. Most people, they never change the radios. So if it's the most likely one you're going to find somebody on.
And you got to remember, it's 1 through 16 is FRS, but also half of those channels are low power.
Right.
Okay, so 1 through, what is it, 8? 1 through 7, 1 through 8, I'm going blank.
It depends on, so if your radio is programmed for low power, it'll only transmit on low power, but a lot of these radios, it'll let you switch to high power. Like the GMRS Pros, you can do it technically. So if you really are worried about reaching out and touching somebody, switch it on to high power mode. Like I said, there are no laws in an emergency. So if you're worried about not being able to hear somebody, switch to high power mode and just blast it.
Okay, let's see. I think we had somebody else. And then
she'd raised her hand. And
okay.
Is there an age limit to work the ham radio?
I think the youngest you can get the license is 14. There is no age limit for somebody to actually sit there next to you and work on your call sign. So like if you have a kid next to you, they can use it under your call sign. But you have to be physically present and able to take control of the radio.
Range boosting, more important than high power, is a good antenna. You could get a mobile antenna, set it up at a high place on metal.
Yeah, for sure. So I would highly recommend, if you have a plan to go a long distance, to look at what infrastructure you can build before you look at getting the most powerful 1,000-watt radio that you can buy.
And antennas are super important too. You'll notice a lot of those radios have and to switched out to better antennas. And even these right here, we just got these in today, and these are our shortwave radios. And Sarah, at the end, do you have the pricing for members? You do. Is it? Oh, right here. Okay, so we got pricing for members, and these are the only shortwave radios we have. And so anyone, whether you're a member or not a member inside here, it gets the member pricing tonight. And you'll notice that all of these right here, we're throwing in a power supply and an antenna, because antennas are that important. This thing, it winds up and you can stretch out that antenna. I don't know how many feet, like 15 feet or something. And it gives you that much more range.
Yeah,
So
for
it's super important.
Shortwave, that's really important.
Yep.
Other questions? Nice, go Aggies.
So you talked earlier about repeaters.
Yes.
Can you explain a little bit that how you connect to them? You talked about creating a network. Can you explain that just a little bit?
Yeah, so a repeater usually sits on top of a hill, although not always, right? And what it is it's a radio that listens and transmits simultaneously. So it has two antennas, one to hear, one to talk, right? And your repeater will listen on one frequency and transmit back out on a different one. So it's a person. No, it's usually it's a machine, and they're timed, so with like lots of technology. So if you have these like a box, the repeater will sit up on top of a hill somewhere with its antenna sticking out, and you'll push down on the transmit button on one channel, and you'll be listening back on your radio on an offset about half a megahertz below where you transmitted at, and it will send back the signal that you sent out. So when you go ahead.
Do you have to know that frequency of the repeater? Is there a set channel?
You look up an app called Repeater Book. That has a lot of the repeaters all over the U.S. and all of their predefined channels and everything that you need to know about them. Your local amateur radio club will maintain those and have records on how they operate. So if you're really interested, I would contact them, because I can only give you superficial information. They will give you very specific information and even tell you like what time they have meetings on that repeater. So.
And I think mygmrs.com has the ones for GMRS, right?
Yeah.
Any other questions? Wow, did you cover everything that well?
I think I covered everything.
Yeah, right.
Either that or I just made everybody super confused.
Awesome. So hopefully that gave you a good overview. We actually have 1 minute or 2 minutes left. I just want maybe 2 or 3 people to say something that you learned today with David's presentation that you thought, well, that's really interesting. I didn't know that. Are there maybe a few people who can tell me? I saw one right there. Oh, got it. Yeah, I'll do that. In fact, while you guys are thinking, let's get a couple of people to do that. This one right here is a digital version of a shortwave radio. It has AM, FM, and shortwave. I think it goes from like 7 to 18 or something like that, which is a really good range. This is a digital version, analog version. Okay, so it's going to be more expensive than this one. Okay, these right here already have the power supply inside it. That's why it's bigger. So this just comes with an antenna. This right here, you need the power supply and the antenna. And so these are all the same thing. These are all the same thing, actually. These 3 are the same thing: red, yellow, and black, digital. And then this is just a small version, 72-hour kits or 96-hour kits, whatever you want, so that you can carry this around easier. So that's what it is. Okay. No, this one actually has shortwave too.
Shortwave?
Yeah, take a look.
What?
Yeah.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, I know. I thought it was really cool. So I looked at it. I goes, no way. Are you serious? It has shortwave? And so you still want you still want an antenna. You know something? It has an antenna. All of them do. And this has solar crank. It has a lithium-ion battery, and it has the ability to add standard batteries to it. It's really nice one. Water resistant, I believe all of these are. And you know something? We didn't do the price with the antenna on this. So we probably need to add a little bit of money to this. The antenna is $13. We could probably do something like I don't know. Because they charge us a lot, so we'll have to figure that out. So, but if anybody wants those, just talk to us and we'll figure out an antenna price for you.
It also charges your cell phone, so.
Yeah, it does a lot of things. It's pretty good little item. So one or two people. Who's brave? Something you learned tonight that you thought that's pretty interesting. I didn't know that. Okay, let's go over here.
Radio frequencies were light.
Yeah.
Isn't that amazing? Pretty cool, huh? Okay, one more. Let's go over here.
It has really intrigued me as far as using the texting and such with the phones, with the radio. I really want to get into that. That was very piquing for me.
What's amazing too is you can actually download maps onto your cell phones, okay, and it's downloaded with these apps, and you literally can be in the middle of the mountains, and you can find each other, and you'll show where each other is on the map. So somebody gets lost, somebody gets hurt, you don't have to spend an hour looking for them. You're just like, you go right to them. It's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So, okay, awesome. Well, thank you again.
Yeah, our next class is Darren Jensen, again, on April 4th at 6:30. It'll be at Tuesday. And he'll be talking about the harvest rights again, but how to freeze dry meats. So, and it won't, what? Okay. Okay, yeah, it won't be posted on the member website. We won't be able to record that and post that right now. Yeah. So make sure if you can't come to Zoom it that night. So April 4th, Tuesday, April 4th at 6:30, but we'll send out an email to let you know. All right. Thank you. Thank you again, Dave. All right. Appreciate it. Good job.